Hi. We're going to look at chapter 32 of the Tao Te Ching. I'll be reading from the Regina Akers translation. And I called chapter 32, How the World Can Come to the Way. The way, eternally nameless, simple, although imperceptible. No one in the world can rule over it. If leaders would abide by it, everything in the world would come to it. Heaven and earth would merge. Sweet dew would descend upon the earth. No one would need to order the people around. Everyone would be equally reliant on the way. Since the beginning of the world, things have been given names. Some naming is practical, but some naming is divisive. People need to learn when to stop naming things. Knowing when to stop will avert danger. Consider how the way occurs in the world. Just as creeks flow into the valley rivers and rivers flow into the ocean. Just peeking at my dog. She's chewing on a toy, and I just want to make sure she's playing safely. All right. So let's just start at the beginning of this. The way, eternally nameless, simple, although imperceptible. No one in the world can rule over it. So what this means is, and we've talked about this before, we cannot make the way suit our pleasure, suit our preference, suit our self-will. We can't harness the way and make it work for us. No one can. That's just not how the way works. And as we've seen in the previous two chapters, if someone tries to control the world, or we could say, that's the way that the way is speaking, control the world, but we could say trying to control anything. They may begin to appear to control, but it can't last. It can't last because no one can harness the way. No one can make the way work according to their will. So the way, eternally nameless, simple, although imperceptible, no one in the world can rule over it. However, listen to this next part. If leaders would abide by it, everything in the world would come to it. Heaven and earth would merge. Sweet dew would descend upon the earth. No one would need to order the people around. Everyone would be equally reliant on the way. So no one can harness the way and have the way serve their will. But anyone can abide by the way. So instead of trying to control the way and have the universe go in the direction that we want the universe to go in, we surrender to the way. And if we surrender to the way, there are these positive benefits. In fact, it says if leaders would abide by it, that would bring the whole world into harmony. And we can even see that in our smaller spheres. If we're a leader of a small organization or a leader in a family unit or anything else, if we abide by the way, we're going to find our little sphere coming into harmony. We saw in chapter 30 that our way of being is always returned. This chapter says that the way is simple. I think that's the best way to understand that simplicity. My way of being is always returned. And so if I abide by the way, by remaining centered in the way, paying attention to the intuition that comes from the way rather than self-will, being in harmony with instead of demanding and controlling, I'm going to find that my sphere is also going to become more harmonious. If leaders would abide by it, everything in the world would come to it. Heaven and earth would merge. Sweet dew would descend upon the earth. Now I see the sweet dew as a symbol. I remember as a young person, I started to say a child, but I think I was actually a teenager. Uh, this was a Bible study that I was involved in, and the group that I was studying with thought that the paradise earth that the Garden of Eden once was is going to return after the prophecies that are laid out in Revelation. You know, this war between God and Satan, that God would win, and then the paradise earth that was originally intended would return. Um, but there's one thing that was said uh, in that Bible study that this reminds me of. There's a judgment here. The judgment was that, you know, rain and thunderstorms and all of that stuff is bad. And I remember this person said, in this paradise earth, what it's going to be like is instead of rain, there's just going to be this dew that comes every night that waters everything. And every day we'll have perfect weather, whatever perfect weather is. Every day we'll have this perfect weather. Well, that's what I see this symbol trying to represent. The symbol is trying to represent everything in the world coming into harmony, not just the humans, but nature coming into harmony. I don't want to go so far as to say, you know, there wouldn't be rain because I don't want to judge rain as bad. There wouldn't be thunderstorms. I don't know that thunderstorms are bad. There wouldn't be wind because I don't know the wind is bad. I don't want to get into these specifics of what is harmony, what isn't harmony. But that's what this symbol is laying out. The symbol is laying out that since our way of being is always reflected, that's not just reflected in the humans around us, that's reflected in everything. And so, if great leaders could bring themselves into alignment with the way, those that people really watch and follow, then people would also come into an alignment with the way. And this beingness would be returned not only by other people, but by nature itself. The way, eternally nameless, simple, although imperceptible, no one in the world can rule over it. If leaders would abide by it, everything in the world would come to it. Heaven and earth would merge. There's that harmony. Sweet dew would descend upon the earth. No one would need to order the people around. Everyone would be equally reliant on the way. Everyone would be centered. Everyone would be following that intuition. It would be like perfect clockwork, the way things worked in the world. Since the beginning of the world, things have been given names. Some naming is practical, like, do you have any water? Is it all right if I have a drink of water? Water names a particular item. That can be practical. But some naming is divisive, like idiot, racial slurs. My mind is going blank, so we'll just let it go blank. Some naming is practical, but some naming is divisive. People need to learn when to stop naming things. You know, when are we going beyond practical to divisive? When are we dividing people into preferred groups and non-preferred groups, groups with power, groups without power? When are we dividing natural situations into good and bad, should be and shouldn't be. People need to learn when to stop naming things. Knowing when to stop will avert danger. What kind of danger is this talking about? Well, our way of being is always returned. So if I start naming certain groups of people as idiots, maybe it's a particular political group, maybe it's a particular racial group, maybe it's people of a particular sexual preference. It doesn't really matter. One gender over the other gender, it doesn't matter. One career field. Uh, if I start naming certain people as idiots, there's a divisiveness that comes out of that, out of my way of being. And if that divisiveness comes out of my way of being, well, my way of being is going to be returned. There's going to be divisiveness and conflict in my sphere, and generally, of course, in the world. That's the danger. The danger is that my way of being is returned. So if I'm in alignment with the way, the benefit is that my way of being is returned. If I am divisive in the way I name things and judge things, then the danger is that my way of being is going to be returned. Consider how the way works in the world, consider how the way occurs in the world. Just as creeks flow into the valley rivers and rivers flow into the ocean. So what is the creek? Well, the creek could be my little way of being, this one person, whether that is going to be in alignment with the way or divisive. My way of being is like a creek that flows into the river and joins with other ways of being, that then flows into the ocean, which is the way of being that predominates in the world. So this really gives us something to think about. What way of being do I choose? And making a choice about a way of being isn't always easy. I mean, it's certainly easy to be at peace and centered in some situations. But in other situations, it can seem much more difficult. So one thing we need to learn is when it's difficult, when there's stress, when there's anger, when there's jealousy, when there's unworthiness, when there's greed, et cetera, when this is what is here, in this mind and body right now. But I recognize that's not the way of being that I want as my creek going out into the world and then being returned. What can I do to genuinely change my way of being? And the answer is what I have always called rest, accept, and trust. Let me check on the dog again. Okay, she looks all right. um, Rest means rest the mind. And what rest the mind means in this case is do my best to bring my attention away from thoughts that are fueling the way of being I don't want. So if my way of being is jealousy, there are thoughts in the mind. Do the best that I can to bring my attention away from those thoughts. And I don't want to do that in a way that represses thoughts. I want to do that in a way that is a genuine shift in interest. And there are different ways to rest the mind. One way is simply to question thoughts, like, am I absolutely certain this is true? Is this type of thinking what I truly want? What is it that sees these thoughts and what am I? There are several different lines of questioning you may have learned from your spiritual studies that can help you shift attention from the thoughts. Another way is just shifting to the current environment, shifting to what is here now other than the thoughts, such as shifting to the sensations in the body, the sounds in the environment, the feeling of the air on your skin, anything at all, anything that is present, right? Sometimes I really look with the eyes. I really look at that bush out the window and just really look at it like I'm looking at a great piece of art. But shifting the attention to here and now through the senses can take the attention away from the thoughts. Also, I used to do self-coaching. I would always start with a deep breath, maybe in a couple of deep breaths. And then I would say, okay, just breathe, rest, relax. These thoughts are here now. These thoughts are present now. But these thoughts are not where I want to place my attention. If I just wait, these thoughts will pass. The mind is riled up, but the mind does not know. I do not need to believe the mind. If I just wait, this will pass and I will see differently. There are a number of things you could do to rest your attention from whatever is feeding your way of being. That's the rest, and rest, accept, and trust. The accept and trust is about accepting or allowing whatever feeling is here now, whether it's jealousy, rage, guilt, unworthiness, anger, the list goes on, right? We have a tendency to want to repress again these bad emotions. And when we repress, we actually keep them. And if we keep them, then they are still a part of our way of being. What we want to do is release them. Release them in a way. I used to have this image in my mind of the world as a pressure cooker. And anything that we keep is moving around in that pressure cooker. But releasing it is releasing it out the valve, out the top of the pressure cooker. So it's no longer a part of the pressure cooker. So by accepting and allowing the feeling to be here, just allowing it without fueling it with more thoughts, it goes out the pressure cooker valve. It leaves. It leaves my way of being, and it leaves. It's no longer the energy that is feeding the world. It's no longer the creek flowing into the river, flowing into the ocean. So, in order to allow an emotion just to be and then evaporate on its own, I have to accept it. I can't be repressing it. I can't be fighting it. I also used to use the image of us sink into a hot tub. The emotion is the hot water. I just sink into it and I let it be. And eventually, if we do that with something, it evaporates. It always evaporates, goes out that pressure valve. So rest, accept, and then trust. The trust in that process is trusting that this is all I need to do for my real way of being to shift. Not in an artificial way, not in a forced way, not in a repressing way, but in a real way, a way that is in harmony with the Tao, and the Tao and this way of being, well, it's recognized and so it's returned. So the simplicity of the Tao is that my way of being is always returned. The simplicity of the Tao is that my way of being is like a creek that flows into a river and mixes with other ways of being, and then flows into the ocean and becomes the way of being of the entire world. And the power is that I can choose my way of being. And if my way of being is not the way of being I want, then I shift in a very real way through practicing rest, accept, and trust. I did that this morning uh, because of a spiritual course that I am taking with a friend. I spent last night contemplating disgust. This was an assignment, contemplating disgust, and really looking to see when I feel disgusted. And the good news is I found that there are many situations where I once would have felt disgust, where because of prior spiritual work, I don't anymore. I'm in acceptance. But I also found areas where I can still feel disgust. And because I was really contemplating that and looking at that, when I sat down to meditate after this contemplation, I noticed that the disgust tension in my body, I'll call it. It was like a contraction. The disgust tension in my body was like a block to the relaxation that I wanted to open to during meditation. So what I did was I practiced rest, accept, and trust at the beginning of the meditation. I rested the mind, which in this case was not difficult for me, but there have been other cases where it has been more difficult. But I rested the mind and I allowed the feeling of disgust, which I mainly felt right in here. I just allowed it. I just looked at it. I didn't do anything with it. And gradually, over a period of a few minutes, it began to weaken, kind of like a cloud breaking up. And by, probably 12 minutes into, there wasn't any disgust left. There was peace, and I was noticing aliveness and joy and those types of things instead of disgust. But I didn't do anything to push the disgust away. I didn't tell myself I shouldn't be feeling disgust. I just rested, accepted, and trusted with that disgust until it naturally evaporated, naturally went out the pressure valve and left. And the way of being is now just naturally peaceful, joyous, right? It's the way of being that I want as my creek. So let me read this to you one more time, and then we'll look at one more translation like we always do. So, chapter 32, how the world can come to the way. The way, eternally nameless, simple, although imperceptible. No one in the world can rule over it. If leaders would abide by it, everything in the world would come to it. Heaven and earth would merge. Sweet dew would descend upon the earth. No one would need to order the people around. Everyone would be equally reliant on the way, centered and reliant on the way. Since the beginning of the world, things have been given names. Some naming is practical, but some naming is divisive. People need to learn when to stop naming things. Knowing when to stop will avert danger. Consider how the way occurs in the world. Just as creeks flow into the valley rivers and rivers flow into the ocean. Hey, Ellie, just checking on your mouth. Okay, I'm just going to make sure she doesn't swallow her toy. She's chewing on it, make sure she doesn't eat it because she could choke on it. So I have to pay attention to her. But she's doing good. Just chewing, not swallowing. I love you. Good girl. You're a good girl. All right. Let's look at another translation. I'm going to share my screen. And right here it's Benjamin Hoff. Benjamin Hoff is also the author of The Tao of Pooh. And he named this chapter without titles, and we'll see why as we read. The way is always without title, rank, or position. And just to remind you of my translation, it said, the way eternally nameless. So you can see this is how he's translating that. The way is always without title, rank, or position. Although its natural simplicity makes it seem small, and I translated small as imperceptible, no one under heaven is capable of making it his subject. If princes and kings were able to guard it and protect it, I said, abide by it, the 10,000 things would act as their guests. I said, all things would come to it. Heaven and earth would notice. I said, heaven and earth would merge. Oh, heaven and earth would notice and would unite. There we go. There's the merge. To send sweet dew. The people, without being commanded, would then behave as equals. I said everyone would be equally reliant on the way. Now, here's where things went a little different with his translation. Since the beginning of systems, rules, and regulations, we have had titles, ranks, and positions. And this is where I had said, since the beginning of the world, things have been given names. He went more specifically with rules, regulations, titles, ranks, and positions. In addition, the titles, ranks, and positions have had us. This is how we have been divided by having people that are higher and people that are lower. Those who hold on to wisdom stop. This is the naming that stops in his translation. This people that are higher and people that are lower. This is where it stops. By knowing to stop, they can avoid danger. Compared to man's constrictive systems, rules, and regulations, and titles, ranks, and positions, the way's existence in this world is like a broad stream in a deep gorge running into a large river flowing into the sea. So he's comparing how men is very restrictive to the way water flows freely. So you can see that, we're interpreting, translating and interpreting the same characters, but he came to something slightly different. And the way that he has done this is not common if you look at many different translations, but I found it interesting. And so that's why I chose to share his. So our assignment then is, of course, to pay attention to our way of being. And when our way of being is the way of being that we want to send into the world and then have reflected back to us, well, then just abide with that. But if we notice that our way of being is not that, if we've moved in some kind of upset, some kind of tension, something that really isn't the way of being we want, then shift into rest, accept, and trust with that way of being. Don't try to do anything else with it. Don't try to control it, justify it, berate yourself, push it away. Don't do any of that. Just like you're shifting into a hot tub, relax your mind, rest your thoughts. If necessary, question your thoughts. Do whatever you can to bring your attention genuinely away from those thoughts. Sink into the emotion, allow the emotion until it evaporates on its own, and trust that that's the real way to shift your way of being in a way that is collected by the Tao, through the creek, river, ocean process of this imperceptible, simple Tao. All right. Yay. She ate a chunk off her toy and spit it out beside her. No swallowing. That's good. All right. I'll see you all when I come back for the next chapter of the Tao Te Ching. Bye.